On the 9th of March 2018, in the Japanese city of Ibaraki, a woman filed a report with the police. "My husband left home and hasn't returned. He even left his mobile phone behind. We had a big fight a few days ago." The missing man was 33-year-old Noboru Uji. He had been married for several years, and the couple had 3 children. At the time, the police assumed that, as an adult man, he had simply chosen to leave home after a family argument. They categorized it as a voluntary disappearance. However, his wife insisted, "But he hasn't even gone to work." Despite her concerns, the officers maintained that they should wait, arguing that Noboru was an adult and capable of taking care of himself. 4 months passed. On the 18th of July that same year, police arrived at the house in Kasumigara, Ibaraki, where Noboru Uji had lived before his disappearance. His wife, Miho Uji, opened the door that morning. Could it be that they had finally found her missing husband? The wife appeared bewildered, seemingly unable to grasp what was happening. However, the police wasted no time. "Where is your husband? We know everything." The officer's firm approach left Miho frozen in place. For a brief moment, confusion flickered in her eyes, but then, as if resigning herself to the inevitable, she raised her hand and pointed. "He's inside the house," she said. How was that possible? The man who had been reported missing for 4 months had been in the house the entire time? The police, seemingly prepared for such a revelation, entered the house immediately. The twist lay in the timeline. Miho had filed a missing person report for her husband on the 9th of March. Yet, on the 28th of March, only 20 days after reporting him missing, she submitted divorce paperwork to the local municipal office. What could explain such a hasty decision? Noboru wasn't just a husband. He was the father of their 3 children. The situation clearly called for a thorough investigation. After filing the missing person report, Miho Uji's behavior and statements began raising more and more questions. Initially, she claimed that Noboru had left his mobile phone at home, but later changed her story. "Oh no, I think he actually took it with him. I must have been mistaken." Such confusion over basic details alarmed the police. Her inconsistent testimony, combined with her swift decision to file for divorce, led investigators to keep a close eye on her. Let's return to the search. Following Miho's indication, the police approached what appeared to be a typical Japanese sliding closet. However, upon opening it, they were immediately drawn to a large rectangular concrete block occupying most of the space inside. But it wasn't the size or weight of the block that shocked them. It was the sight of a piece of human skin protruding from the concrete, seemingly from the forehead area. This was a clear sign that a body was entombed inside. The state of the room only confirmed their suspicions. 2 air purifiers running simultaneously, along with numerous deodorants and aromatic oils scattered about. Everything had been arranged to mask the smell of decomposition. Later, forensic analysis revealed that Noboru had not died on the day Miho reported him missing. Instead, his death had occurred approximately a month earlier, in February. 44-year-old Miho Uji was immediately taken into custody at the scene. When questioned by the police about her motives for the murder, she broke down in tears, repeatedly saying, "I didn't mean to kill him. I didn't even know he would die." According to Miho, her husband frequently came home drunk and became extremely aggressive. He would violently punch walls or throw objects, such as a fan. She claimed that his outbursts had left her fearing for her own safety and that of their children. Miho confessed to the police that one night, as she watched her husband sleeping heavily after drinking, she was overcome by an irresistible urge to kill him. Beside the bed lay the cord from a phone charger, and she used it to strangle her sleeping husband. At first glance, her story seemed to offer a semblance of justification. If Noboru had indeed been as aggressive as she claimed, it could have driven her to commit the murder. However, the police decided to verify her claims by interviewing those who knew the couple. A former co-worker of Noboru emerged as a key witness. He revealed that Noboru had once come to work with a head injury. He appeared embarrassed, as though trying to conceal the fact that he had been assaulted. This detail contradicted Miho's narrative. Perhaps she wasn't the victim of abuse, but rather the perpetrator. Still, the true dynamics of the family could only be understood by its members. Even if Miho had been subjected to violence, she had never previously filed a complaint or given any indication of such abuse. On the other hand, Those who knew Miho adamantly refused to believe in her guilt. To many, she was a devoted mother to her 3 children, a 12-year-old daughter and 4-year-old twins. People described her as caring, active, and energetic. She often rode her bicycle around the neighborhood, always greeting her neighbors with a warm smile, and was deeply involved in school activities. Her charisma and dedication to her family left a positive impression on everyone she encountered. Miho was a large woman with a loud, low-pitched voice, but this physical trait never made her seem intimidating or aggressive to those around her. Miho, despite being seen by many as a calm and friendly woman, occasionally raised her voice sharply at her children or husband, adopting a commanding tone. However, as noted by neighbors, her behavior never appeared overly aggressive. The most horrifying part of this story involves the children who lived in the house. The eldest daughter, 12 years old, seemed to know more than she was willing to share. It's hard to fathom, but from Noboru's death in mid-February until his body was discovered in July, the 3 children lived in the same house as their father's corpse. This situation was disturbing enough on its own, but the most shocking revelation came later. You may recall that Miho filed for divorce. For such a filing, both spouses' signatures are required. By the time the paperwork was submitted, Noboru was already dead, meaning his signature could not have been genuine. The investigation revealed that the signature in the husband's section of the divorce paperwork belonged to the eldest daughter. At first glance, it might have seemed like she had simply followed her mother's instructions without fully understanding. However, the truth was far more chilling. The eldest daughter told the police that her mother had actively involved her in events surrounding the murder. Miho frequently confided in her, venting her frustrations about Noboru. "Marrying him was a mistake from the start. Your father is a burden. He will destroy all of us. I can't stand the sight of him anymore. I need to get away." Miho also used threats to exert control over her daughter. "Do you want to end up in an orphanage?" These words became part of the manipulation Miho employed to dominate her children, forcing them to comply with her will. "Either help me or you'll end up in an orphanage. Decide for yourself," Miho told her 12-year-old daughter. Terrified of losing her mother or being separated from her family, the girl felt compelled to follow her mother's orders. This help involved becoming an accomplice in the murder of her own father. Miho had planned the crime for a long time. She frequently sent her daughter to check if her father was asleep. At times, she even suggested pushing him down the stairs or hitting him over the head with a bottle. These instructions were horrifying, especially given the girl's young age. In the week leading up to the murder, Miho asked her daughter daily to observe her father's sleeping habits, whether he was sleeping deeply enough for her to strangle him with a charging cable without waking him. The day finally came when Miho decided to carry out her plan. At the moment, she looped the cable around her husband's neck. The daughter was forced to assist in the crime. She held down her father's arms and legs as he struggled, until he stopped breathing. This traumatic experience would undoubtedly haunt her for the rest of her life. But Miho's coldness did not end with the murder. After killing her husband, she began assigning her daughter new tasks related to the disposal of his body. The girl's responsibilities included caring for the corpse, hiding its presence in the house, and assisting her mother with other aspects of the crime. However, their marriage did not last long, ending in just a few years with a divorce. Noboru was Miho's 3rd husband. On the surface, Miho appeared to be a caring mother and homemaker, but her tumultuous past and unstable personal life cast a shadow over her present. After Noboru's murder, Miho continued to force her daughter into the role of an accomplice. The girl not only helped with the murder itself, but also had to manage the aftermath, monitoring the smell of the body, replacing air fresheners, and buying new odor-masking products. During questioning, the girl confessed to the police that she hated the tasks her mother assigned her, but felt powerless to disobey. Her words are profoundly heartbreaking. "I loved my dad. Even though Mom was always angry with him, I always treated him well. But I had to be part of this murder. It was horrible. I didn't want to check the smell of his body, but I was too scared to disobey my mom." When Miho learned of her daughter's statements, she denied everything, claiming that the girl hated her father as well and willingly participated in the murder. This shocking assertion only deepened the disgust and outrage surrounding Miho's behavior. As the police dug deeper, they discovered that Miho had exhibited problematic behavior since her school years. She skipped classes, frequently played truant, fell in with the wrong crowd, and acted aggressively. This darker side of her personality may well have been the root of the tragedies that unfolded in her life. Miho managed to captivate Noboru despite their significant age difference and her questionable past. When they met, she was 31 years old while he was only 20. She deliberately hid the truth about herself. She didn't reveal her real last name, concealed her actual age, and most importantly, withheld the fact that she had 2 children from previous marriages. Miho crafted the image of an ideal girlfriend. She used a fake online profile, introducing herself as a 22-year-old named Tanaka Maiko, complete with an edited, flattering photo. Young and inexperienced, Noboru fell for her deception. According to his friends, he was a kind, trusting person who tended to form attachments quickly. These traits made him an easy target for Miho. Their relationship progressed rapidly. Within a few months of meeting, Miho moved in with him and soon began discussing marriage. Unaware of her true nature, Noboru was blinded by her determination and perhaps by his feelings for her. However, married life quickly became a trial for Noboru. Miho turned out to be hot-tempered, aggressive, and extremely selfish. She demanded expensive purchases, behaved impulsively, and caused frequent scenes. The hardest blow for Noboru came when he discovered the truth. His wife was not only older than she claimed, but had also been married twice before. She had 2 children from her previous relationships and a mountain of debt. These revelations left Noboru deeply shocked. He felt betrayed, but despite everything, he tried to keep the family together. The arguments in the house grew more frequent, yet Noboru continued to fight, believing it was his duty to overcome their difficulties. Miho, on the other hand, showed no interest in preserving their relationship. She became increasingly distant from her husband, focusing solely on her own benefit. Her behavior grew more self-centered and calculated. The culmination of their conflicts came on the day Miho decided to get rid of Noboru. Her past, riddled with deceit, manipulation, and a relentless pursuit of easy money, revealed her true nature, a nature that ultimately led to this horrific crime. The couple dated for about a year before starting their life together in Ibaraki in July 2014. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly, but it wasn't long before Miho began to act. With a serious expression, she told Noboru, "I'm pregnant." Noboru was overjoyed. He felt it was his responsibility to care for the child and build a family. Without hesitation, he filed the paperwork to register his marriage with Miho. However, her pregnancy turned out to be a lie. Based on her past experiences, Miho likely believed that mentioning a pregnancy would compel a man to marry her. She used it as a manipulation tactic. When the truth came out, Noboru was shocked, but he chose to stay with her despite the deceit. Shortly after, Miho truly became pregnant, giving birth to a daughter who became the center of Noboru's happiness. Later, the couple welcomed twin sons, and for a time it seemed their life had finally stabilized. But problems began 3 years before the tragedy. One day, Noboru needed to obtain copies of official documents from the municipal office. While reviewing the papers, he noticed something strange. What? Why doesn't the name match? It turned out that Miho was still using the fake name she had created to meet Noboru online. Do you recall how she introduced herself as Tanaka Maiko? She continued to use that name even after their marriage. All those years, Noboru had called her Maiko-chan, believing it to be her real name. He was devastated. How can you hide your real name from your husband? We're married and we have 3 children. This revelation shattered Noboru's trust in his wife. He felt betrayed and manipulated. Though he tried to keep their family together, his doubts and mistrust of Miho grew stronger with time. Meanwhile, their lives were already far from stable. Financial struggles, ongoing deception, and constant tension weighed heavily on their relationship, setting the stage for the tragic events to come. Noboru worked tirelessly to provide for his family, but Miho's extravagant spending habits were a constant burden. Her obsession with acquiring items that impressed others pushed the family into financial ruin. Noboru's income couldn't keep up with her demands, and it eventually led to bankruptcy. Even after they filed for bankruptcy, Miho continued to take out loans in Noboru's name and secretly withdraw his savings. Her recklessness reached its peak when she embezzled 50 million won from the union fund of Noboru's company. These weren't even their personal savings. They were the hard-earned money of Noboru's colleagues. When Noboru discovered this, he was stunned. "Those aren't my funds. They belong to the company. If you don't return them within 2 days, it's over between us." These words were likely the breaking point for Miho. It was then she made the irrevocable decision to kill her husband. She began plotting the crime, carefully planning every step. After the murder, she immediately withdrew the remaining money from Noboru's bank account and spent it as she pleased. In the weeks leading up to the discovery of the truth, Miho attended a local festival with her children. Photographs from the event showed her looking happy and carefree, her behavior betraying no hint of guilt. On the 5th of July, 2019, the trial of Miho began. Noboru's family demanded the maximum punishment, death by execution. Remarkably, even in court, her late husband's relatives continued to refer to her as Maiko. Although her real name had already been revealed, years of deception had ingrained the fabricated identity into everyone's minds. Miho appeared in court wearing a black shirt, thick-framed black glasses, and an odd choice: red sandals that seemed out of place and inappropriate. When she began to speak, her voice quivered as she struggled to hold back tears. "I deeply regret what I've done, especially to my daughter and my husband's parents. I am so sorry." She apologized for her actions, but her words rang hollow in the shadow of her heinous crimes. Miho appeared to express remorse for her actions. "I regret taking a life and causing emotional trauma to my daughter," she said, tears in her eyes, as she attempted to inject emotion into her words. Some might have believed in her sincerity, but she quickly revealed her true nature. The moment she returned to her seat, Miho began yawning, as if the trial had exhausted her. This gesture shocked everyone in the courtroom. The judge harshly condemned her actions and demeanor. "The defendant has repeatedly displayed extravagance and deceit, betraying her spouse. Her actions, including manipulating and forcing her own daughter to participate in the crime, are profoundly reprehensible and warrant severe punishment." In the end, Miho was sentenced to 23 years in prison. Yet, even after the verdict, questions remained unresolved. The most pressing question concerned possible accomplices. Many wondered whether Miho could have encased her husband's body in concrete on her own. Was someone else involved, besides her 12-year-old daughter? This lingering doubt continued to trouble investigators and the public alike. Another puzzling detail was Miho's eagerness to finalize her divorce from her deceased husband as quickly as possible. Some speculated that she was already plotting to find a new target for a fourth marriage. Undeniably, Miho revealed herself to be selfish, manipulative, and unscrupulous. Her actions inflicted deep emotional scars on her children, particularly her eldest daughter, who bore the heaviest burden of this tragedy. The fate of her children evokes profound sympathy. They were victims of their own mother's cruelty, yet one can only hope that they are now living in a safe environment where they can begin to heal their emotional wounds. Thus ends this harrowing story. May the children who endured such horrific trials find solace and support, allowing them to grow into happy and healthy individuals. I always enjoy reading what you have to say. Today, we journey back to the year 2005, to the morning of March 21st, when a worker named A was performing his routine task of inspecting distribution boxes along the highway, connecting the cities of Seongnam and Gwangju in Gyeonggi Province. Immersed in his duties and focused on his inspection, he stumbled upon something horrifying. Inside one of the boxes lay the body of a young woman. The police immediately launched an investigation, and it was soon revealed that the deceased was a 27-year-old woman with the surname Choi, who had been reported missing several days earlier. The missing persons report had been filed by her mother on March 17th. Choi was a flight attendant, last seen on March 16th around 1 a.m. in the bustling district of Seohyundong in Bundong, Seongnam City. At that time, she was getting into a taxi. She was found wearing the same clothes, a black cardigan and jeans. However, there was one peculiar detail. She was in high-heeled shoes and one of the shoes was missing. The autopsy results indicated that the cause of death was strangulation. Minor injuries were found on her thighs and knees, likely sustained during the abduction. However, there were no signs of sexual assault, nor any clues that could lead to the perpetrator. The police surmised that this was a typical robbery-motivated murder. This theory was supported by records of a large cash withdrawal from Choi's credit card on the day of her disappearance. At 6:40 a.m., a sum of 1,010,000 won was withdrawn from an ATM located near Shingu University. And this was only the beginning. The following day, an additional 4 million won was withdrawn from an ATM at a metro station in Ansan. In total, over 5 days after the woman's disappearance, 7,170,000 won was withdrawn from her card in 4 transactions. The police immediately focused their efforts on identifying and locating the card user. As a result, they obtained surveillance footage from one of the ATMs in Ansan. The footage captured a man, wearing a cap pulled down over his eyes, withdrawing money using Choi's card. He was estimated to be about 175 centimeters tall. The police promptly declared him a suspect and simultaneously began investigating among former criminals convicted of similar crimes, robberies involving murder. Meanwhile, there was another crucial aspect in the investigation of this case. Shortly before her disappearance, Choi took a taxi ride. The police launched an extensive search for this taxi, questioning potential witnesses along the way. During the investigation, they received a tip from a taxi driver who claimed to have dropped off a woman resembling Choi in the Cheongjeon area of Bundong. To verify this information, the police examined the GPS records of that taxi. However, it turned out that the timing of the ride did not align with the estimated time Choi had entered a taxi. What initially seemed like a crucial lead once again led the investigation to a dead end. The residential complex where Choi lived was known to be bustling with activity, even at night. Had she indeed been dropped off by the taxi and subsequently abducted on her way home, there would likely have been numerous witnesses. Yet no one came forward claiming to have seen anything unusual. Under these circumstances, the most plausible theory was that the last taxi driver who transported Choi could be a suspect. It was believed that she might never have exited the taxi. The police then focused their attention on taxi drivers operating in the Bundang area, prioritizing those with prior criminal records. They especially zeroed in on those who were working on the day of Choi's disappearance. Through meticulous scrutiny of all potential suspects, one taxi driver came under the spotlight. Upon checking GPS data, the police found it to precisely match the time and location of Choi's disappearance. This man was Min Byung-il, a 38-year-old with a criminal history that included robbery. With this evidence in hand, the police identified him as the prime suspect. Meanwhile, Min Byung-il continued his work, ferrying passengers as if nothing had happened. Given his criminal past, the police feared he might commit another crime, maintaining his calm demeanor even after the alleged murder. However, if Min Byung-il realized he was under surveillance, he might attempt to flee. It was imperative to proceed with caution. The police then devised a detailed plan. They decided to deploy undercover officers as passengers. On March 28 at 4 p.m., the police located Min Byung-il's taxi near Soyeon Station. 2 detectives, disguised as passengers, settled into the car. "Could you take us to the nearest police station?" they asked. Unbeknownst to Min Byung-il, he was driving 2 passengers straight into a trap. As they neared the station, police officers suddenly surrounded the vehicle and placed him under arrest. The thrill of capturing the prime suspect was short-lived. Min Byung-il remained stubbornly silent, refusing to utter a single word. There were enough suspicious circumstances to raise eyebrows. The last GPS signal, aligning with the movements of the deceased, Choi, originated from this very taxi. It was evident that Choi had indeed gotten into his car. Yet there was no direct evidence of murder. No murder weapon had been found. Could he have been an innocent taxi driver? Min Byung-il vehemently denied any wrongdoing, but the conclusive evidence was closer than anyone thought. On the passenger seat of his taxi lay a high-heeled shoe belonging to the deceased Choi. There was no escaping this. When this evidence was presented to Min Byung-il, he, in despair, confessed to the deed. Surprisingly, he claimed he hadn't even realized Choi's shoe had been left in his car. Had it not been discovered, he might never have spoken. On the day of the crime, the victim, Choi, entered the taxi in an intoxicated state. At some point during the ride, she couldn't hold back and vomited inside the vehicle. An irritated Min Byung-il exclaimed, "Damn it, just my luck!" and grew furious with Choi. This mishap sparked a quarrel between the two. However, shortly after, Miss Choi, slightly tipsy, fell asleep. Meanwhile, Min Byung-il was still simmering with anger. Seeing Choi asleep, he was seized by the urge to commit a crime. Instead of heading to the destination the woman had mentioned, he steered the taxi toward a deserted area by the Tancheon River. After some time, Choi awoke to find Min Byung-il standing over her, threatening to end her life. In the process, he took her card and even extracted the PIN code from her. But his crime didn't stop there. Choi had seen his face, and if she reported him, he, as a repeat offender, would face harsher punishment. So, Min Byung-il eventually strangled her. He then disposed of Choi's body by hiding it in a sand spreader on the side of a highway. Acting as if nothing had happened, he began withdrawing cash using Choi's card. Meanwhile, he continued working as a taxi driver, brazenly going about his business. Curious about what he spent the stolen money on? He squandered $7,170,000 won mostly on horse racing bets and entertainment. It was all blown away. Min Byung-il had been in and out of prison numerous times. He never had stable employment. At best, he earned around $1,000,000 per month driving a taxi, but even that he gambled away on the races. Moreover, he had virtually no sense of responsibility for his crimes. For Min Byung-il, the young woman who got into his taxi intoxicated was not just a passenger, but a target for his criminal intentions. Experts believe his insatiable desire for money was the motive behind his crime. It seems his constant internal thirst for wealth perfectly aligned with the circumstances of that day. In truth, Min Byung-il was a man who lived without a plan, taking life as it came. People like him rarely commit crimes deliberately because they live by the motto, "Let's see what happens." However, on the flip side, they fall into the category of extremely dangerous individuals who can commit crimes at any moment if the urge strikes. That day, his likely aim was robbery, but it escalated to murder, didn't it? Consider this. If he hadn't been caught then, he could have continued driving his taxi, ready to commit new crimes at any moment, a truly perilous situation. Although the crime was spontaneous, Min Byung-il already had a lengthy criminal record, and his impulsiveness was well known. Therefore, it was imperative to isolate him from society. In November 2005, he was sentenced to life imprisonment and is currently serving his time in one of the country's prisons. But the story doesn't end there. On the day his sentence was handed down, Min Byung-il brazenly attempted an escape. This audacious getaway took place at the Suwon City Prosecutor's office. As the court session concluded, guards approached Min Byung-il to cuff him and escort him to the transport vehicle. Just as they neared him, Min Byung-il unexpectedly struck one of the guards in the face, knocking him to the ground. Without wasting a moment, he dashed off and vaulted over a roughly 2-meter-high fence surrounding the prosecutor's office. At that moment, he was handcuffed, barefoot, and clad in prison garb, but that didn't deter him. After his escape, he vanished into a nearby residential area. There, he stole a pair of blue sweatpants and white sneakers from a balcony, which he promptly put on. Later that day, around 6 in the evening, he found a file in a park, and over the course of 4 hours, managed to saw off his handcuffs. Unhesitatingly, he attempted to contact an acquaintance, informing them of his escape and his need for clothes and money. Fortunately, instead of assisting the fugitive, his acquaintance chose to report him to the police. As a result, at 3 in the morning, when Min Byung-il arrived at the agreed meeting spot, the police were already lying in wait. Thus, his bold escape lasted only 11 hours. When asked why he decided to flee, Min Byung-il replied that he was terrified of a life sentence and thus decided to run. It seems he hadn't given much thought to the consequences. Moreover, he claimed that he had lost the will to live, which propelled him to escape. However, in my view, his desperate leap over the 2-meter fence indicates that he had more than enough desire to live. One of the detectives investigating Min Byung-il's case noted his incredibly brazen and unrepentant demeanor. He showed little remorse for the murder and even attempted to escape. It seems like a typical criminal profile. On that fateful day when Min Byung-il committed the murder, a flight attendant named Choi was enjoying a rare day off with friends. On her way home, on what seemed like an ordinary day, she tragically lost her life. At least here, no one blames the victims, right? Today's case reminded me that in our everyday lives, we can encounter a criminal at any moment, and that fear has firmly taken root in my heart. Following this incident, the family of the deceased filed a lawsuit against the transportation company that had hired Min Byung-il as a taxi driver, and reportedly, the company paid compensation amounting to about 300 million won. At least someone in this story was held accountable. It's been over 20 years since the tragedy. Nowadays, the laws have become significantly stricter, and individuals with a criminal record cannot obtain a taxi driver's license. This makes sense, given how many taxi-related cases have appeared in the Friday incident files. But it's astonishing to think that just 20 years ago, things were different, which speaks to a lack of vigilance at the time. Some still believe that the system of employment restrictions for former criminals remains imperfect. For instance, The rules for couriers and drivers, whom we encounter without knowing their faces, are still too lenient. Of course, these individuals provide us with essential and valuable services, for which we are very grateful. However, there is concern that someone like Min Byung-il could exploit gaps in the system and become a threat once more. The sound of a piano is quite common in our surroundings. While it can be beautiful, it can sometimes become a source of noise complaints. Today's case revolves around a horrific crime in Japan that was triggered by piano music. Let's begin. During the 1960s, Japan experienced a period of rapid growth, often called its era of high growth and revolution. With the 1964 Tokyo Olympics and a per capita GDP that doubled worldwide averages, the country's economy made huge strides. These achievements also influenced the everyday culture of Japanese citizens. TV sets, washing machines, and refrigerators began appearing in homes, and as television became a household fixture, it formed the centerpiece of family gatherings. Washing machines and refrigerators added convenience, and piano music also became more common in residential settings. On August 28, 1974, at 7:15 a.m. in Hiratsuka City, Kanagawa Prefecture, south of Tokyo, there was already intense heat early in the morning. On the fourth floor of an apartment building lived 46-year-old Wama Matsuzo. He was awakened by the piano music coming from apartment 306, the Okamura family's residence below him on the third floor. That day, for some reason, the piano started 2 hours earlier than usual, causing Wama annoyance right from the start. They could keep it down if they tried. They're definitely doing this on purpose, he thought. Wama had moved into this apartment 4 years earlier, in June 1970, with his wife. 2 months after they settled in, the Okamura family moved into apartment 306 on the third floor, and from that point on, Wama's life changed completely. The root of his animosity lay in how the Okamura family never greeted him upon moving in, an act normally expected in such buildings. Wama considered them discourteous. In addition, the Okamuras had a hobby of making furniture on Sundays, which involved hammering and caused sounds that greatly bothered him. There were other noises as well: balcony doors, front doors, even the opening and closing of the bathroom and shower room. Everything felt unbearably loud. He repeatedly complained, "Your hammering is too noisy. Could you please be more careful?" Yet the noise persisted. One day, Okumura Yeiko, the wife, passed by Wama without acknowledging him. At that time, he already suspected his neighbors were giving him the cold shoulder. He began to believe Yeiko was turning the other residents against him, fueling his resentment toward her. 3 years passed. In November 1973, the Okumura family bought a piano, and their 8-year-old daughter, Mayumi, began to practice. This intensified Uwama's frustration. By April 1974, Uwama was working from home. The piano sounds continued as usual, so he finally went to apartment 306 to ask, "I'm working from home, so could you please not play the piano at this time?" Despite his request, he still heard the piano afterward. By this point, it felt as though the music was tearing apart his mind. Uwama became convinced the Okamuras were doing it all on purpose. "They're making their child practice early in the morning just to harass me." Enraged and feeling pushed beyond his limits, Uwama decided he had to kill the Okamura family. He gathered a 20cm Debe knife and a kitchen knife to use as weapons, along with a towel. He also took pliers, planning to cut the telephone line in case someone tried to call the police. In August 1974, he carefully prepared for his crime. On the morning of the incident, he waited for Yaeko's husband, Mr. Okamura, to leave for work, confirming he had indeed gone. He then noticed Yaeko coming out to take the trash with her second daughter, 4-year-old Yoko. This meant 8-year-old Mayumi was alone inside their home. Seeing his chance, Wama entered apartment 306 around 9:10 a.m. First, he used the pliers to cut the phone line at the entryway. Mayumi was by herself in a room, quietly practicing piano. Wama ran straight at her and stabbed her multiple times in the left side of the chest with the Deba knife, killing her. He then hid behind a wall, waiting for Yaiko and Yoko to return. Before long, Yoko returned to the apartment on her own. She went into her room, and Wama showed no mercy, even to a 4-year-old child. He stabbed Yoko's abdomen several times and strangled her with a towel. Right after killing the children, he reportedly muttered, "Sorry to cause trouble," as if making some bitter remark stemming from his old grudge, and then covered their bodies with a towel. Shortly after, their mother, Yaeko, came home from taking out the trash. Finding the place unnervingly quiet, she called out, "Yoko? Mayumi?" Concerned at the silence, she rushed to the room. In the brief moment it took her to see her children lying there, she had no time to grieve. Wama stabbed her repeatedly in the neck, killing her as well. All 3 victims died from massive blood loss. Afterward, Wama opened the door to leave. He was spotted by a woman living in apartment 305. Startled, he ran upstairs to his own apartment on the 4th floor, grabbed the tools and blood-stained clothes, put them in a paper bag, and fled on his motorcycle. The neighbor in 305, noticing his blood-stained clothing and realizing he was coming out of the Okumura apartment, immediately called the police at 9:15 a.m. Upon arriving at the scene, officers were confronted by a horrifying sight. They promptly identified Uwama as the suspect and issued a nationwide alert for his arrest. Uwama drove his motorcycle and ditched both it and the paper bag with his tools near Miyaya Mayaku. The first night, he slept on the street. On the second night, he rested inside a car parked by the roadside near Hashimoto Station. Unable to bear the harshness of being homeless, he finally turned himself in to the police in the early hours 2 days later and was arrested on murder charges. During questioning, Uwama claimed, "I brought the knife because I was afraid Mr. Okumura might kill me." He also said he felt sorry for his victims and expressed some regret and excuses. When asked why he had bought a 20-centimeter Deba knife, he admitted, "There was a family at my old apartment. 4 people I intended to kill. I purchased it in Chigasaki for that purpose." Indeed, from 1959 to 1963, before moving to his current place, Wama had lived in a different apartment where he also had run-ins with neighbors. He harbored such deep grudges that he even investigated those former neighbors' new addresses. He reportedly visited them twice, though nothing further came of it. Who exactly was Wama Matsuzo? Born in 1928 in Tokyo to parents who ran a bookstore, he grew up in an ordinary environment. As a child, he was lively and did well in school. However, during elementary school, he mocked a friend's stutter by imitating it and ended up acquiring a stutter himself. This shift caused him to become introverted. In his first year of middle school, he endured a humiliating incident in Japanese class. He couldn't read the hiragana in the textbook fluently, and it sank him into a strong inferiority complex. After graduating, he worked at factories and as a subway station attendant in Tokyo. In 1951, he was convicted of embezzling company funds and sentenced to 1 year in prison with a 3-year suspended sentence, resulting in his dismissal. He bounced around jobs in Tokyo and Kanagawa, sometimes experiencing homelessness. In May 1959, he married into his wife's family, a type of arrangement where the husband moves into the wife's household, but they divorced in under a year. After that first divorce, he worked rotating shifts at a car factory, often sleeping during the day. Around that time, he developed severe tension headaches and became extremely sensitive to noise. By about 1965, even morning birdsong was enough to make it impossible for him to rest. In April 1965, he remarried after being introduced to another woman from the same company where he worked. Wama handled the boilers, and his new wife was a dormitory supervisor, so they lived together in company housing. However, his noise sensitivity persisted. He complained about factory sounds, co-workers chatting, and disputes followed. His marriage suffered, and he even struck his wife repeatedly, prompting her to consider leaving him several times. In April 1970, they moved into the apartment building where this incident occurred. By July 1974, 1 month before the crime, he lost his job and was living on unemployment insurance. His wife had gone back to her family, aiming to divorce him. Whenever the piano started downstairs, he would head to the library or go fishing, trying to cope. But on that particular day, the stress he had been suppressing finally reached a breaking point. Am I the only one suffering? I can't stand this anymore. I don't care what happens to me, but I'm going to take those people in the apartment below with me. With that resolve, he carried out the killings. Following his crime, on February 24, 1975, at the fourth hearing, data were presented about the noise levels measured at Wama's apartment. Initially, at 2 p.m., the inspectors found the piano noise was drowned out by ambient sounds, making it impossible to record. Trying again at 7 p.m., with windows open, they recorded a maximum of 44 decibels. From what was explained, daytime noise regulations often hover around 45 decibels, and evening regulations around 40 decibels. If the piano was played only during daytime hours, it wouldn't necessarily exceed those standards. For context, 44 decibels is roughly at a level where most people can still carry on conversation without interference, though for someone highly sensitive, it might be irritating. Wama's wife testified that he was unreasonably sensitive to sounds, but even she found the piano volume rather loud at times. Also, the building in question was an older housing complex where walls and floors were thin, just 12 centimeters thick in the victim's unit's flooring. Modern apartments in many places often measure around 20 centimeters between floors. A psychiatric specialist who evaluated Wama concluded that while he had no severe mental disorder and his intelligence was average, his moral judgment was worn down by his obsession with noise, leaving him still responsible for his actions. The victim's family demanded the death penalty for Wama. His final statement contained no real remorse beyond, "I want to sit in the chair used for executions, and that's all." The court granted his wish, sentencing him to death. At present, Wama's death sentence has not been carried out. As of 2025, it has been 47 years since his sentence was finalized, making him 97 years old, the oldest death row inmate in Japan. There is hope that, during his long years in prison, he might reflect on his sins and come to terms with the gravity of what he did. What do you make of this case? People who have dealt with noise issues from neighbors know how stressful it can be. When someone becomes pathologically hypersensitive to sounds, however, it's also problematic because noise is an inevitable part of everyday life. The key is mutual consideration and caution on both sides. Even now, many neighbors argue about noise disturbances. On October 16, 2022, a seemingly ordinary Sunday afternoon took a sinister turn when a mysterious call was received at the Washington 911 Emergency Center around 12:50 p.m. The operator, trained for every kind of emergency, immediately picked up, attempting to establish a connection with the caller. Standard inquiries were made to gauge the situation. The operator repeatedly offered assistance and asked if the caller knew her address. Yet on the other end, there were only muffled moans of a woman, as if she was being prevented from speaking. Sensing imminent danger, the operator swiftly initiated the process to trace the call's location. It was soon discovered that the call originated from a secluded area on the outskirts of Washington state, a spot known for its popularity among romantic couples seeking privacy. Wasting no time, the operator dispatched the nearest police patrol to the location and maintained the line, hoping to keep the caller engaged. For 7 tense minutes, the operator endeavored to sustain the conversation, listening intently for any clues to the unfolding drama. Suddenly, the sound of something shattering pierced through the phone, followed by a man's scream. In that moment, the recording captured the frantic barking of a dog, as if the animal sensed the looming danger. The audible commotion suggested a struggle had ensued, with the man's cries growing increasingly intense. The operator, trying to calm the woman, reassured her that police assistance was on the way. "They're already en route," he repeated, while simultaneously sending updates to the patrol about the potential threat. But abruptly, the line went dead. Attempts to reconnect with the caller were futile. Shortly after, another call came into the 911 center, this time from neighbors reporting a loud altercation in a nearby house. The address linked to this new report was on Roseburg Street. With the location now clear, the police made their way there. En route, they verified details and discovered that the homeowner was a 42-year-old Korean woman named An Young-suk. The aggressor was identified as her estranged husband, 53-year-old An Chae-gyung. Due to a prior domestic violence incident, a restraining order had been issued against him. At the time, Young-suk was in the process of divorcing her husband, and they were living apart. It appeared that the voice heard during the call most likely belonged to her husband. The likelihood of it being his voice was exceedingly high. When the police arrived at the scene, they were greeted by the sight of the garage and front door wide open. Ascending to the second-floor bedroom, they discovered shattered glass. Chairs lay broken and scattered throughout the room, creating an eerie atmosphere of chaos. The floor was littered with torn strips of packing tape and the completely shattered remains of an Apple Watch. Yet despite their thorough search, the police could find no trace of the homeowner, An Young-suk. Neighbors reported that mere minutes before the police arrived, they saw her husband's car speeding away. Soon, another figure arrived at the scene, a visibly distressed 20-year-old daughter of Young-suk. She rushed into the house explaining that she had received an urgent message from her mother at 1:07, prompting her immediate return home. What exactly was unfolding here? Thanks to the daughter, some clarity was brought to the morning's events. It was a Sunday, and Young-suk had returned home with her children after attending church. Her husband's car was parked in front of the house. Although the couple was in the midst of a divorce, her husband came by once a week to pick up laundry. Their relationship remained tense, but on this day, Young-suk asked her daughter to leave them alone to discuss divorce matters. The daughter, well aware of her father's temperament, felt uneasy but nonetheless took her 11-year-old brother to a nearby ice cream cafe. It was there she received the alarming message from her mother, warning of danger. With this information, the police determined that the safety situation concerning An Young-suk was critically serious. They urgently began tracking her husband An Chae-jeon's car route through CCTV footage. It was revealed that at the moment his van was speeding out of the neighborhood, a police car was arriving from the opposite direction in response to the call. Back then, no one realized it was An Chae-jeon's vehicle. The situation is clear. The husband took Young-suk. If they don't hurry in locating her, her chances of survival will rapidly decline. It has been 12 hours since her disappearance, and there is still no sign of her. The children are waiting, fraught with worry. Around 12:50 a.m., an unexpected and ominous report came in from just 13 kilometers away from home. "Hello, there's a woman who just ran out of the woods. She seems to need help urgently." The caller explained that the woman had suddenly appeared and was frantically shouting, "My husband is trying to kill me!" She was clearly terrified. The police quickly pinpointed the location and rushed to the scene. When they arrived at the specified house, everything was just as reported. It was Young-suk. However, her condition was dire. Her clothes were stained with blood and dirt. Bruises marked her arms, legs, and body. Particularly noticeable were the tape marks on her wrists and forearms. Upon seeing the police, Young-suk burst into tears and began pleading for help. "My husband wants to kill me. He's still in those woods." To better understand what transpired, let's rewind to the events of the previous day. Young-suk had met with her husband to discuss the details of their divorce. She didn't want to argue in front of their children, so they were alone. We previously mentioned that their eldest daughter is 20 years old, meaning she's already an adult. As for their 11-year-old son, they calmly discussed custody arrangements for him. Soon they reached an agreement that their son would stay with his mother, Young-suk. Up to that point, everything had gone fairly smoothly. The next matter to address was the division of property. At this juncture, Young-suk suggested that her husband share his pension savings with her. What's the story behind this? Her husband, An Chae-gyung, had served for over 30 years in the U.S. Army as a senior officer, participating in various wars and handling information processing. Now, he was retired. Typically, if an American military service member serves for more than 20 years, they receive a pension amounting to a certain percentage of their former salary for life. It's an undeniably enticing proposition. So much so that among American servicemen, there's a saying, no matter how grueling the service may get, it's worth enduring those 20 years. However, the moment his wife brought up the topic of retirement savings, the husband, who had been calm until then, underwent a complete transformation. "Are you out of your mind? Give you my retirement savings? You'll get a divorce, but not a single dime. I'd rather kill you than hand over the money," he shouted in a fury. His wife, as if accustomed to such reactions, fell silent. She then suggested ending the conversation for the day, told him to leave, and retreated to her bedroom on the second floor. As she attempted to escape, her husband, in a fit of rage, charged after her and struck her on the back of the head with his fist. He then picked her up and hurled her forcefully to the floor. What followed was a merciless barrage of kicks. Despite Yeon-suk's cries for help, the beating continued until she lost consciousness. At this point, her husband, An Chae-kyung, fetched some duct tape and began binding her limp body. He tied her hands and feet, wrapping tape around her eyes and mouth as well. Once assured that she was thoroughly immobilized, An Chae-kyung left the room for a short while. But it was then that fate seemed to intervene. The Apple Watch on Yeon-suk's wrist reacted to her critical state. The watch automatically dialed 911. Soon after, the voice of an operator could be heard. Regaining consciousness, albeit weakly, Yeon-suk desperately tried to call for help. However, due to the tape, she couldn't speak, only managing faint moans and whispers of "help, help." Her feeble attempt to attract attention didn't go unnoticed, and her husband heard the sounds. Enraged, he stormed back into the room, tore the watch from her wrist and smashed it with a hammer. In that moment, An Chae-kyung realized that the police's arrival was just a matter of time. Indeed, American law enforcement typically responds to calls within a mere 2-3 minutes. So, An Chae-kyung hurriedly bundled his bound wife into the car and made a run for it. In that harrowing moment, An Yeong-suk struggled, kicking at the car doors, but it was all in vain. After approximately 20 minutes of driving, An Chae-kyung brought the vehicle to a halt in a deserted forest, hoisted his wife over his shoulder, and trudged deeper into the thicket. An Yeong-suk instinctively sensed that nothing good could come of this. Why, she wondered, would anyone need to venture into such a remote woodland? Yet even if she wished to escape, it was impossible. She was completely tied up, her eyes blindfolded. Soon her husband simply dropped her onto the ground. As she fell, her head struck a rock, and blood began to flow. The pain, however, was short-lived, for soon the sound of a shovel digging into the earth echoed in the darkness. In complete obscurity, her fear peaked. After some time, when her husband seemed to have finished digging a grave, he suddenly tore the tape from her mouth. Only then could she speak, and Yeong-suk began to plead, crying, talking about their children, begging him to spare her. But her husband remained cold. "I need nothing, neither a wife nor children. I'm just going to kill you." With those chilling words, An Chae-kyung plunged a knife into his wife's chest, and Yeong-suk collapsed helplessly. The pit he had dug in the ground was precisely the size to fit a woman's body. It was a deep pit, about 50 centimeters in depth. Into it, he simply shoved her. He didn't just shove, he forced her in. But that wasn't the end. To ensure she couldn't climb out, he piled heavy logs on top and began to cover everything with earth. As the job neared completion, An Chae-kyung left the site. In essence, he had buried his wife alive. However, she was still alive. A knife was lodged in her chest. Blood streamed from her head and her mind was clouded. Yet one thought remained clear. She had to survive for her children. Trapped in that narrow pit, she continued to move, writhing and struggling to break free. The earth crumbled around her, but this created a small gap through which she could breathe. That little bit of air was her lifeline. She kept fighting, and soon she felt the tape binding her hands loosen. Her constant movements had helped her slip it off. She freed her hands and then removed the tape from her legs and eyes. Carefully widening the pit, she managed to claw her way out. Silence enveloped her surroundings, but her husband might still be nearby. Indeed, his car was parked not far away. Even through the slightly open window, she could see the mist of his breath. And Yeong-suk immediately crouched and desperately crawled to a spot where her husband wouldn't see her. After some time, when she felt sure she had exited his line of sight, she stood up and, without looking back, sprinted forward. She couldn't let him catch her again. She ran like a madwoman, barefoot, for a full 30 minutes. Suddenly, she spotted a house in the distance with lights glowing in the windows. "I will be saved! I will be saved!" she thought, as she hurried faster and faster. Reaching the house, she frantically pounded on the door, screaming, "Help! Help me! My husband wants to kill me!" Fortunately, she managed to escape. The police arrived soon after her call for help, and An Yeong-suk was taken to the hospital. Now, to capture the criminal An Chae-kyung, a massive police operation was launched, as her husband was still somewhere in the woods. They decided to comb the forest, starting from the place where An Yeong-suk had escaped, running for 30 minutes. Considering her extreme state of stress, the direction given might have been inaccurate. Eventually, the police expanded the search area, and soon search dogs were brought in, methodically combing through the entire forest. During the search, the police stumbled upon a pit, presumably where Yeon-suk had been buried. Inside, they found pieces of duct tape and hair, clear signs of a struggle. The officers continued their search efforts, concentrating on this area, yet they were unable to locate An Chae-kyung. It appeared he had already fled. However, the next morning at 7:37, about 10 kilometers from the forest, a local resident noticed a suspicious vehicle on a trail typically used for light walking. Cars were rarely seen in this area, making the sight of a parked vehicle unusual. Sensing something was amiss, the resident called the police, who arrived on the scene within 15 minutes. Inside the car, An Chae-gyeon was found asleep. He was arrested without resistance and compliantly followed the police. Let us now examine the charges against An Chae-gyeon: first-degree attempted murder, domestic violence, first-degree kidnapping, as well as robbery and assault. 2 days after his arrest, a hearing was held regarding his detention. And Chae-gyeon's lawyer stated, "He has no prior convictions, and we are prepared to post bail in the amount of 2 billion won for his release." For the victim, Yeon-suk, this was as shocking as a bolt from the blue. She filed a statement claiming, "If he is released, I might perish." The court sided with her, and the bail request was denied. In April 2024, An Chae-gyeon's trial commenced. Once again, his attorney pleaded for leniency. It was claimed that An Chae-gyeon committed the violence due to post-traumatic stress disorder, known as PTSD, which he developed during his military service. Having gone through war during a deployment, he became more aggressive, unable to control his impulses or maintain rational thinking. His lawyer requested understanding that these circumstances led to the domestic violence and attempted murder. Additionally, a restraining order had been issued, preventing him from entering the house where his wife and children were, which only exacerbated the situation. Throughout this period, An Chae-gyeon wandered like a homeless person, moving from place to place, which only intensified his stress. Moreover, he was unable to receive treatment for PTSD, and on the day of the incident, he took an excessive dose of medication for the disorder, further clouding his judgment. Meanwhile, standing in the courtroom with tears in his eyes, An Chae-gyeon addressed his family. He expressed that if he could go back to that day, he would never have allowed what happened to occur, repeatedly apologizing to his wife and children. Yet, as his wife listened, she was overwhelmed with incredible anguish. The outcome of the trial remained uncertain, as the acknowledgement of PTSD could mitigate his culpability, and even if his crime was deemed committed in a state of mental disorder, the punishment might be less severe, despite all the horrors he inflicted on his wife. The most concerned was An Young-suk, who pleaded with the prosecution to isolate her husband from society. Her children supported this decision as well. Ultimately, the court sentenced An Chae-gyeon to 13 years and 9 months of imprisonment for second-degree attempted murder and domestic violence, adding a 3-year suspended sentence and a lifetime ban on approaching An Young-suk, as well as a lifetime ban on possessing firearms. At the final hearing, the judge noted that the victim, An Young-suk, endured terrible suffering and fear, yet showed courage. After the verdict was announced, An Young-suk couldn't hold back her tears, overwhelmed by complex emotions. This was likely due to the hatred for her husband, who had tried to kill her, and the horrific memories of being on the brink of death. After this event, Young-suk's life changed completely. Some time has passed, but she still suffers from psychological trauma and continues treatment. I believe the horror of that day won't fade in a year or two, but I sincerely hope she heals as soon as possible and that happiness finally reigns in her family.